The morning sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, casting a pale golden hue over the marble countertop. I moved with the practiced grace of decades, my hands knowing the rhythm of breakfast preparation by heart. Toast in the toaster, coffee brewing, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. My husband sat at the table, his eyes fixed on his phone, fingers methodically scrolling through the morning news. His presence, once a source of warmth, now seemed to merely occupy space, a familiar piece of furniture in our domestic landscape. "Do you need anything from the store?" I asked, my voice smooth but detached. He muttered something about needing more coffee pods and settled back into his routine. I watched him for a moment longer, hoping for a spark of connection, a glance, a touch, anything. But his world remained confined to the glow of the screen. After he left for work, I stood alone in the quiet of the house. The stillness was both a comfort and a reminder of how my life had folded into this predictable pattern. I loved him, of course, but love had become a quiet, dutiful thing, like a houseplant surviving on the occasional drop of water, just enough to keep it from withering completely. That afternoon, hunger pulled me from my thoughts, and instead of rummaging through the fridge, I decided to order from the small cafe down the street. Their tomato bisque had a way of wrapping me in warmth, a momentary indulgence I allowed myself. When the doorbell rang, I smoothed my hair and opened the door. "Delivery for you," he said, his voice light, a bit of summer in the chill of my day. He was young, maybe in his early 30s, with an easy smile and eyes that lingered a moment longer than necessary. He handed me the brown paper bag, his fingers brushing mine, and I felt a tiny spark, a reminder that my skin could still react, my heart could still shift gears. "Thank you," I managed, my voice sounding too formal, too composed. He nodded, his smile never faltering, and as he turned to leave he said, "Hope you enjoy it. Maybe I'll see you again." The door closed and the house swallowed me in its silence once more. I stood there for a moment, clutching the warm bag, the echo of his words dancing in the air. It was nothing, I told myself. Just a polite delivery guy. But beneath the surface, something stirred, like a pebble dropped into a still pond, ripples spreading further than I intended. Over the next few days, life resumed its steady march. My husband came and went, our conversations a series of well-worn paths. Work, dinner, the weather. But in the quiet pockets of my day, I found my mind drifting back to the doorway, to the soft curve of his smile. I started ordering from that cafe more often, telling myself it was the soup, the convenience. Yet every time the doorbell rang, my pulse quickened and my fingers fumbled with the lock. When he appeared again, he greeted me with that same warmth. This time our exchange stretched longer. He told me his name, asked about my day. His presence was like a gust of fresh air in a room I hadn't realized had grown stale. His laughter filled the hallway, a sound that lingered even after he was gone. I knew it was dangerous, this game of stolen moments and unspoken curiosity. But I also knew that for the first time in a long while I felt seen. Not as a wife or a caretaker, but as a woman. The kind of woman who might still have a story left to tell, a chapter unwritten. As I closed the door behind him that day, a thought took root, fragile and persistent. What if there was more? What if, beneath the surface of this quiet life, there was still a pulse, still a chance to feel something unexpected? And so, I stood in the kitchen, the cool marble beneath my hands, and let that question hang in the air, dangerous, intoxicating, and impossible to ignore. The days began to blur together, each one a carefully crafted mosaic of routine and quiet discontent. My husband continued his steady march through life, his patterns as predictable as the ticking of the kitchen clock. I often found myself standing by the window, staring into the garden, wondering if my reflection in the glass was the only proof that I still existed beyond the roles I had inhabited for so long. Wife. Homemaker. The silent keeper of our domestic harmony. It started innocently enough. Another lunch order from the cafe, a quiet anticipation simmering just beneath my skin. My fingers hesitated over the menu, my mind less on the food and more on the brief exchange at the door. When the doorbell rang, my pulse quickened, a traitorous thrill that I barely recognized in myself. He stood there, framed by the doorway, his silhouette outlined by the afternoon sun. His expression was warm, familiar, as though he had been waiting for this moment just as much as I had. I noticed the way his hair caught the light, the slight curve of his lips when he said my name. It was the kind of detail I hadn't noticed in anyone for years, and it left a small but significant impression. Good to see you again, he said, his voice like a melody that softened the edges of the world. I nodded, a polite smile, my fingers brushing his as I took the bag. The touch was brief, a whisper of contact, but it lingered in the air between us. I wanted to say something more to break the barrier of pleasantries, but the words tangled in my throat. He seemed to sense it, his eyes searching mine, as if offering an unspoken invitation to step beyond the safety of our mundane exchange. I hesitated, and the moment slipped away, dissolving into the hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of a lawnmower from down the street. After he left, I stood at the door for a long time, the cool metal of the doorknob pressed against my palm. I replayed the interaction, dissecting every glance, every nuance, searching for hidden meanings in the ordinary. It was nothing, I told myself, a harmless flirtation. But the truth pulsed beneath the surface, raw and undeniable. I wanted more. The next time he arrived, the conversation stretched just a little further. He asked about the flowers on the porch, commented on the sunlight filtering through the trees. His words were simple, but they cut through the stillness of my day, drawing me out of the shadows of my own life. I found myself laughing, a sound that felt foreign, as if it belonged to someone I used to know. It was during one of these visits that the line between curiosity and something deeper began to blur. I had ordered a salad, but when I opened the bag I found a small chocolate pastry nestled among the containers. I looked up, surprised, and he grinned, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "On the house," he said, and for a moment the world outside the doorway ceased to exist. I bit into the pastry, the rich, sweet taste dissolving on my tongue. It felt like a secret shared between us, a small rebellion against the monotony. I could feel his gaze on me, the air between us charged with possibilities. And then, as naturally as breathing, the space between us vanished. His lips were soft, tentative, testing the waters. My hands found his arms, a gentle anchor as the room tilted around us. It was not a kiss of passion but of discovery, a quiet question asked with mouths instead of words. When we parted, his breath lingered on my skin, a warm reminder of the line we had just crossed. Silence filled the room, thick and heavy. I could hear the soft tick of the clock, the distant rumble of traffic. My mind raced, a tangle of thoughts and emotions, but beneath it all was a quiet certainty. I had taken the first step into a world where every choice would carry a weight I was not sure I could bear. He left without another word, the door clicking shut behind him. I stood in the hallway, my fingers pressed to my lips, the taste of chocolate and danger still lingering. It was only then that I realized my phone was ringing, the shrill tone cutting through the haze. I fumbled for it, my hands clumsy and unsteady. It was my husband. His voice was calm, predictable, a tether pulling me back to the reality I had momentarily escaped. He mentioned something about dinner plans, his words a lifeline back to normalcy. I murmured a response, the sound of my own voice strange in my ears. When the call ended, I sank to the floor, my back against the door. The cool wood pressed into my spine, grounding me as my mind unraveled. What had I done? What was I becoming? The questions circled like vultures, but beneath them lay a truth I could not ignore. I felt alive. In the days that followed, I moved through life as if on a tightrope, each step a delicate balance between the woman I had always been and the one I was becoming. My husband remained blissfully unaware, his affection steady but distant, like a ship passing in the night. I played my part, the dutiful wife, the keeper of secrets, the master of small, practiced smiles. But beneath the surface the waters churned. I found myself lingering by the window, my eyes drawn to the street, searching for a glimpse of him. My reflection stared back at me, a ghost of who I used to be, haunted by the promise of what might come next. And so, I waited, my world balanced on the edge of a single question. What happens now? The days became a delicate dance of anticipation. Every morning I woke with a quiet thrill simmering beneath the surface, a warmth that unfurled as I moved through the motions of my daily routine. I took longer with my hair, chose my clothes with a new awareness, as if he might be standing just beyond every door, every corner. My wardrobe, once a palette of safe, muted tones, began to bloom with colors I hadn't worn in years. A soft blue sweater that brought out my eyes, a delicate silk blouse that whispered against my skin. It wasn't for him, I told myself. It was for me. But the truth nestled deeper, a secret I wasn't ready to admit. I started making excuses to order from the cafe more often. A forgotten ingredient, a craving for their soup, a sudden need for fresh bread. I knew it was absurd how transparent my excuses might seem, but I couldn't bring myself to care. Every knock on the door was a jolt of electricity, a chance to see him, to catch his eye, to feel that strange and intoxicating connection. He became more than just a delivery driver. He was a thread of color woven into the gray fabric of my days. His laughter filled the hallway, his stories of everyday life painted pictures of a world outside my carefully constructed walls. He told me about his plans to visit his family, a road trip he had taken along the coast. I listened, drawn into his life, his world, the easy rhythm of his voice. And then one afternoon the fabric of my safe, predictable world began to fray. I had decided to take a walk to clear my head. The autumn air was crisp, leaves swirling in golden red whispers along the sidewalk. Without thinking, my steps led me towards my husband's office. I had been there only a handful of times, but the building loomed familiar, a quiet monolith among the bustling street. It was then that I saw him. The young delivery man, my secret, standing at the front desk of my husband's office. He held a paper bag, his posture relaxed, the easy charm I had come to know radiating even from a distance. My breath caught, my heart a wild thing trapped in my chest. I ducked behind a corner, my body pressed against the cold stone of the building. My mind raced, tangled in a web of fear and thrill. What if they met? What if my husband noticed the same warmth in his eyes that I had? Minutes stretched into eternities. I watched as he handed over the bag, exchanged a few words, and turned to leave. His gaze swept over the room, casual and unassuming, but for a moment I felt his eyes on me, even through the wall, through the glass, through the air itself. When he finally walked out, I remained hidden, my pulse echoing in my ears. I waited until my breathing slowed, until the world settled back into its usual rhythm. When I finally emerged, I moved with a practiced nonchalance, as if I were just another passerby, a woman with nothing to hide. I walked the long way home, my thoughts a spiral of what-ifs and maybes. The danger of it was sharp and exhilarating, a blade against the softness of my ordinary life. That evening, as I prepared dinner, my husband mentioned the new delivery service at his office. His voice was casual, a passing comment as he chopped vegetables. I felt the blood drain from my face, my hands tightening around the edge of the counter. But he didn't notice. His world continued in straight lines, while mine spun in delicate, dizzying circles. I spent the night in a haze, my mind split between the man sitting across from me and the one who lingered in the shadows of my thoughts. I wanted to ask my husband what he thought of the delivery driver, to search his face for any sign of suspicion. But I held my tongue, swallowing the words, the truth, the fear. Later, as I lay in bed, the room swallowed in darkness, I felt the weight of my choices settle over me. I had crossed a line, and with every step forward, the path back grew fainter, the way home shrouded in mist. I wanted to believe that I could still turn around, still find the safety of the familiar. But beneath that hope was a deeper pull, a siren song calling me to the edge. I closed my eyes, and in the quiet, his face appeared behind my eyelids. His voice, his touch, the way he made me feel seen. It was dangerous, this longing, but it was also real, raw, and more alive than anything I had felt in years. And so, I lay there suspended between two worlds, the life I knew and the life I craved. And in the fragile space between sleep and wakefulness, I made a promise to myself. I would see him again. Whatever the cost, whatever the risk, I needed to know where this path would lead. The night stretched on, and somewhere beyond the walls of my home, the world turned, carrying me closer to a future I could not yet see. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope. Every step forward was met with a gust of uncertainty, a shifting wind of guilt and desire. I moved through my life as if nothing had changed, maintaining the delicate balance of routine while a storm brewed beneath the surface. My husband continued in his usual patterns, his affection as familiar as the worn fabric of our living room couch. He kissed me on the forehead when he left for work, his lips a gentle press of warmth that failed to reach the deeper, aching parts of me. I found myself in front of the mirror more often, studying my reflection with a new scrutiny. My hands moved through my wardrobe with purpose, selecting blouses with softer fabrics, dresses that hinted at the curves I often concealed. I wore perfume that lingered in the air, a subtle invitation only I knew existed. My jewelry, once simple and understated, became bolder. Delicate chains, small hoops that caught the light, a bracelet that clinked softly when I moved. It was as if I were dressing not for the life I led but for the one I imagined, the one that whispered possibilities in the quiet moments. Our messages became a secret rhythm of my day. I would catch myself smiling at my phone, fingers brushing over the screen as if it held more than just pixels and words. His texts were brief, often playful, a continuation of our conversations at the door. He asked about my day, told me stories of his own. There was an ease to our exchanges, a simplicity that felt like a lifeline. He asked about my favorite places in the city, if I liked movies, what kind of books I read. His curiosity was a mirror to my own, reflecting back a version of myself I hadn't seen in years. One afternoon, when the sun hung low in the sky, turning the world into a watercolor of amber and gold, he sent me a picture of a small cafe on the edge of town. It was charming, with ivy crawling up its brick walls and small tables nestled under a canopy of trees. He wrote, "You'd love it here. Maybe we could go sometime." His words felt like a key turning in a lock, a door opening to a room I wasn't sure I had the courage to enter. I hesitated before responding, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The implications of a meeting outside the safety of my home were clear, the boundary between curiosity and action thinning to a fragile thread. My pulse drummed in my ears as I typed a simple, "I'd like that." The next morning I woke with a clarity that bordered on recklessness. I moved through the house with a quiet determination, my actions rehearsed in the silence of my mind. I told my husband I had errands to run, a list of half-truths that slipped from my lips with unsettling ease. He barely looked up from his phone, his attention tethered to the world beyond our walls. I felt a flicker of resentment, a small spark of anger that gave way to freedom as soon as I closed the door behind me. The cafe was as charming as the photo had suggested. I arrived early, the air cool against my skin, my breath a soft plume in the autumn chill. I chose a table at the back, away from prying eyes, my hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea. Each minute stretched into an hour, my nerves taut, a violin string pulled to its limit. When he arrived, the world seemed to shift, colors deepening, sounds softening. He sat across from me, his presence filling the space between us with a tangible warmth. His smile was the same as always, open and inviting, but there was something else beneath it. A shared understanding, a recognition of the step we were taking together. Our conversation drifted easily, a river winding through safe topics. Favorite movies, childhood stories, the quirks of our daily lives. But beneath the surface, a current pulled us forward, an unspoken promise woven into every glance, every brush of his hand against the table. His fingers tapped a soft rhythm and I found myself mirroring the motion, my own hands restless, drawn to him by a force I couldn't name. At one point he leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I've been thinking about this all week." His words settled between us, a truth laid bare. I felt a shiver move through me, not from the cold but from the weight of his confession. I wanted to respond, to share my own truth, but my voice caught in my throat. Instead I reached out, my hand finding his. His skin was warm, his grip firm, and in that moment I knew there was no going back. We stayed there until the light began to fade, the world outside turning to shadows. He offered to walk me to my car and I accepted, the distance between us shrinking with every step. When we reached the door he paused, his expression a mix of hope and restraint. I took the final step, closing the space between us, and our lips met, a soft, lingering kiss that spoke of all the things we hadn't said. When we parted, his thumb brushed my cheek, a gentle trace that left a mark only I could feel. He smiled, a quiet promise, and turned to leave. I watched him go, my body a mix of warmth and weightlessness, my mind a maze of tangled paths. I stood there long after he disappeared, the cool air wrapping around me, a reminder of the world I had left behind. As I drove home, the city lights blurred through the windshield, each one a pinprick of possibility. I knew I had crossed another line, the ground beneath me shifting, but I couldn't find the fear I expected. Instead, there was only a sense of inevitability, as if I had been walking this path all along, and only now had I begun to see where it led. After that afternoon at the cafe, the world seemed to shift its axis. I moved through my days with a secret threaded beneath the ordinary fabric of life, a hidden seam that only I could feel. My mornings were still filled with the familiar routines, preparing breakfast, tidying the house, exchanging small, practiced smiles with my husband, but beneath the surface something new pulsed. It was as if my skin had become a canvas for invisible ink, and only he could read the words etched upon it. We began meeting more often, slipping through the cracks of my schedule, creating pockets of time where reality softened at the edges. We would sit in his car, parked along quiet streets, or walk through hidden trails at the park, where the leaves rustled secrets above us. Each moment felt like a stolen breath, an exhale held for too long finally released. He would tell me about his dreams, the places he wanted to see, the life he envisioned beyond the small town that held us both. His words painted landscapes of possibility, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine stepping into them. At home, my husband remained a steady presence, his routines unwavering. He would ask about my day, his voice a gentle hum that filled the spaces between us. I answered with half-truths, stories woven with the soft threads of deception. I told him I had taken up walking, that I was visiting friends more often, rediscovering the small joys of my own company. He seemed pleased, interpreting my newfound glow as a sign of contentment. In a way, he wasn't wrong. I was happier, more alive, but it was a happiness built on borrowed time, a light cast by a flame I kept hidden. The tension between my two lives began to tighten, a cord pulled taut, vibrating with the weight of every choice. There were days when I would catch myself staring at my phone, my thumb hovering over his name, the urge to reach out almost overpowering. Each message from him was a thread pulled, unraveling the careful weave of my life. His words were simple, but they held a weight, a promise of something more. I miss you. When can I see you again? I wish we had more time. One afternoon, as the rain tapped softly against the windows, he suggested we go away. Just for a weekend, a small escape where we could breathe without the weight of the world pressing against us. The idea slipped into my mind, a whisper that grew louder with each passing day. I imagined it. The freedom of waking up beside him, of sharing unhurried mornings and quiet evenings, of living in a bubble where reality couldn't reach us. It was dangerous, intoxicating, and I wanted it more than I was willing to admit. I found myself at the computer searching for hotels, looking up train schedules, my fingers moving as if under a spell. I chose a small inn by the lake, a place tucked away from prying eyes. I told myself it was just a fantasy, a harmless indulgence, but when I clicked book now, the room became a real place, a destination, a promise. That evening, my husband suggested we take a trip together. His words caught me off guard, the timing so perfect it felt cruel. He spoke of the early days of our marriage, the road trips, the spontaneous adventures, the laughter that had filled the spaces between us. His eyes held a softness I had forgotten, a glimpse of the man I had once fallen in love with. I nodded along, my heart split in two, the choice between comfort and chaos pulling me apart. The days leading up to the trip were a blur of preparation and quiet deceit. I told my husband I would be visiting a friend, an old college roommate who lived a few hours away. He accepted my story without question, his trust a sharp blade against my conscience. I packed a small bag, my hands steady, my mind a storm. Each item I folded into the suitcase felt like a step further from the life I had known, a path winding deeper into the unknown. When the day finally came, I kissed my husband on the cheek, the warmth of his skin a reminder of all I was risking. He wrapped his arms around me, a brief embrace, and as I pulled away, I caught the edge of something fragile in his eyes. It was a flicker of uncertainty, a shadow of doubt, but he let me go, his faith in me unshaken. I drove to the station with the radio off, the silence a cocoon around me. Each mile felt like a thread snapping, a tie severed. When I arrived, he was already there, standing on the platform, his silhouette a promise against the gray sky. He smiled when he saw me, his relief a mirror to my own. As I stepped into his arms, the world around us faded, the train arriving with a soft rumble, a door opening to the life we had only dreamed of. And so I boarded, the tracks stretching out before us, the future a ribbon of silver cutting through the fog. I did not look back, my eyes fixed on the horizon, where the world waited with open arms and secrets yet to be written. The journey to the lake felt like a dream unfolding in slow motion. The train hummed softly, a steady rhythm that synced with the beating of my heart. Outside the window, the world blurred into shades of green and gray, trees bending in the wind, fields stretching into the horizon. The rain had turned to mist, droplets trailing down the glass, and I found comfort in their transient path, a reminder that nothing in this world stayed in one place for long. He sat beside me, his hand resting on mine, the warmth of his touch anchoring me in the moment. His presence was a quiet reassurance, a promise woven into the gentle squeeze of his fingers. There were moments when I wanted to speak, to give voice to the storm inside me, but the words remained lodged in my throat, tangled in fear and hope. Instead, I leaned into the silence, allowing it to wrap around us, a cocoon where the world outside ceased to exist. The small inn by the lake was just as I had imagined, a quaint retreat with stone walls and ivy creeping up the facade. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, a crisp freshness that filled my lungs with something dangerously close to freedom. The receptionist greeted us with a polite smile, her eyes skimming over us as if we were just another couple seeking refuge from the ordinary. I signed the guest book, my name a quiet betrayal inked onto the page, a shadow of the truth hidden beneath the surface. Our room was simple but cozy. A large window overlooked the lake, where the water lay still and glassy, mirroring the sky. I moved through the space, my fingers brushing over the rough wool of the blanket, the cool surface of the porcelain sink. Each touch was a reminder that I had crossed a threshold, stepped into a place where the rules of my life no longer applied. I felt both weightless and grounded, a strange dichotomy that left me breathless. We spent the afternoon exploring the trails around the lake. The path wound through tall grasses and dense clusters of trees, the air alive with the rustling of leaves and the soft crunch of earth beneath our feet. He walked ahead of me at times, his silhouette a dark shape against the sun-dappled greenery. I watched him, the easy way he moved, the curve of his smile when he turned back to me. There was a lightness to him, a joy I had not known I craved until it was placed before me. As the sun began to set, we returned to the inn. He opened a bottle of wine, the soft pop of the cork a signal that the day had gently folded into night. We sat by the window, the lake a mirror of twilight, colors melting into each other like ink in water. He told me stories of his childhood, the summers he spent by the sea, the way the salt air made his hair curl. His voice was a thread pulling me into his world, weaving me into the tapestry of his past. When he asked about my own childhood, I hesitated. My stories felt like faded photographs, edges worn and colors muted. I spoke of simple things, riding my bike through empty streets, the taste of ice cream on a hot day, the way my mother's perfume lingered long after she left the room. Each memory felt fragile, a petal pressed between the pages of a forgotten book. He listened, his attention a soft glow that bathed me in warmth. As the night deepened, the conversation slowed, words giving way to the soft cadence of breath and the quiet hum of the heater. He reached for my hand, his fingers tracing the lines of my palm, mapping the landscape of my skin. I closed my eyes, the sensation a tether, drawing me into a space where nothing else mattered. I allowed myself to be held, to exist in the simplicity of touch, the unspoken language of connection. The weight of the moment settled over us, a blanket of understanding that needed no explanation. I felt the gentle rise and fall of his chest, the rhythm of his heartbeat a lullaby in the stillness. It was a kind of intimacy I had not realized I missed, the kind that asked for nothing but presence, a shared breath, a quiet acknowledgement of being seen. When I finally drifted to sleep, it was with the taste of wine on my lips and the echo of his voice in my dreams. The room held us in its embrace, the walls a boundary between this fragile world and the reality I had left behind. I did not think of my husband, of the life waiting for me beyond the lake. Here I was not a wife or a caretaker. I was simply a woman cradled by the night, adrift in a sea of possibilities. Morning came softly, the light filtering through the window, casting shadows that danced along the walls. I woke to the sound of his breathing, steady and calm, a gentle reminder that I was not alone. I watched him sleep, the curve of his lips, the flutter of his eyelids as he dreamed. For a moment I allowed myself to imagine a life where this was not a stolen moment but a beginning. Where waking up beside him was not an escape but a homecoming. But as the day began to unfold, reality crept back in, a chill that seeped through the cracks of my fragile fantasy. I knew this could not last, that the train would take me back, the world would reclaim me. And yet, as I lay there, wrapped in the quiet, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was still time to find the path that led to where I truly belonged. Returning home was like stepping from a dream into cold reality. The train ride back was quiet, the rhythm of the tracks a metronome ticking away the last moments of freedom. He held my hand, his thumb drawing gentle circles over my skin, but the warmth that had once grounded me now felt like a tether. I couldn't shake the sensation that each mile brought us closer not to safety, but to the unraveling of the life I had so carefully constructed. My husband greeted me with a smile, his arms wrapping around me in a hug that felt both familiar and distant. His embrace was soft, his scent a blend of home and routine. I let myself sink into it, hoping the weight of his affection might anchor me, pull me back to the surface of my own life. But beneath the comfort was a sharp edge, a reminder of all that lay beneath my skin. I moved through the house like a ghost, my footsteps soft against the hardwood floors. The room seemed smaller, the walls closer than I remembered. I went through the motions, unpacking my bag, folding clothes, running a load of laundry, but my mind drifted, a kite pulled by a wind I couldn't control. I replayed the weekend in flashes. The lake, his laughter, the quiet moments when the world seemed to hold its breath. It was a story I could only tell in the silence of my own thoughts, a truth that had no place in the light of day. It wasn't long before the weight of my choices began to press down. My husband started asking questions, small, innocuous things that landed like stones in a still pond. He wanted to know about my trip, the friend I had supposedly visited, the details of my journey. His curiosity was gentle, his tone filled with nothing but genuine interest, but each answer I gave felt like stepping onto thin ice. I could hear the cracks forming, see the dark water beneath, and yet I kept walking forward, my smile a mask that stretched tight over the truth. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and violet, he mentioned a conversation with our neighbor. Her words were a simple observation, a passing comment about seeing a man at our door while I was away. She had assumed he was a relative, someone visiting while my husband was at work. Her story drifted into the room like a draft, cold and unwelcome. I felt my pulse quicken, the room tilt ever so slightly. My husband's eyes searched my face, his expression soft, but beneath it I sensed a shift. There was no accusation, no hint of anger, just a quiet uncertainty, a thread of doubt woven into his gaze. I answered with a calm I did not feel, my voice steady, the lie slipping from my lips with practiced ease. I told him it was a delivery, a mix-up with an online order, nothing more. He accepted my explanation with a nod, his trust a fragile thing balanced on the edge of our shared history. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and I could feel its roots stretching into the dark corners of our life. I began to notice the way his eyes lingered on me, how his questions seemed to brush up against the truth without fully touching it. He became more present, his affection a shadow of something deeper, a need to hold on to what he could not see slipping away. He suggested we spend more time together, proposed a weekend trip to the coast, a chance to reconnect, to find the rhythm we had lost. I nodded along, my mind a spiral of tangled paths. The walls of our home seemed to lean in, the air thick with the weight of my choices. I found myself reaching for my phone, the impulse to contact him, to escape, to find a moment of clarity. But each time I hesitated, the screen lighting up with the reflection of my own uncertainty. He sensed the distance between us, the silence that stretched like a river, too wide to cross. His attempts to bridge the gap only made the space feel larger, the echoes of my own deceit reverberating off the walls. I could see the hurt in his eyes, the quiet way he pulled back when I did not lean into his touch. His love was a soft, persistent thing, but I had become a mirror that reflected nothing back, a surface too smooth to hold on to. One night as I lay in bed, the room heavy with the weight of unspoken truths, he reached for my hand. His fingers laced through mine, his grip gentle but firm. I closed my eyes, the warmth of his skin a reminder of all that was real, all that I had risked. I felt the push and pull of my own heart, a tide caught between the shore of safety and the open sea of possibility. As he drifted to sleep, his breath a steady rhythm, I stared into the dark, my mind a tangle of threads I could not untie. The choice before me loomed, a crossroads where every path led to loss. I knew that the life I had once known was slipping through my fingers, a ghostly thing that no longer fit the shape of who I had become. And yet, as the night stretched on, I remained frozen, a statue carved from the stone of my own fear. In the quiet of the early morning, before the light had touched the sky, I rose from the bed. I moved through the house, each step a whisper, a promise unspoken. I stood by the window, the glass cool against my forehead, and watched as the world began to stir. The horizon held a sliver of light, a promise of a new day, but I remained in the shadows, caught between the pull of the dawn and the comfort of the night. The days stretched out in muted tones, each one a careful balancing act between reality and the fragile world I had built behind closed doors. My husband's presence became a constant hum, his affection a soft pressure that I both craved and feared. He had grown more attentive, his small gestures of love now tinged with something else. Curiosity, perhaps even suspicion. His touch lingered a bit too long, his questions a fraction too pointed. I felt as if I were standing on a stage, every movement a performance, every word a line from a script I had not memorized. One afternoon, as I folded laundry in the dim light of our bedroom, he appeared in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the fading sun. His expression was gentle, a mask of normalcy, but his eyes held a shadow that I could not decipher. He leaned against the doorframe, his posture relaxed, but his fingers tapped a soft rhythm against the wood, a quiet betrayal of his inner restlessness. "I was thinking," he began, his voice smooth but deliberate, "about us. About how things have been lately." I nodded, folding a towel into a perfect square, my hands steady despite the tremor I felt beneath my skin. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, the silence between us stretching, a taut string threatening to snap. I miss us. The way things used to be." His words were soft, a brushstroke against the canvas of our shared history. "I thought maybe we could get away for a bit. Just the two of us. Reconnect." A surge of panic rose within me, cold and sharp. The idea of being alone with him, of stepping into a space where the walls could not hide the distance between us, filled me with dread. But I could not let it show. I smoothed my expression, a calm mask that felt like a second skin. "That sounds nice," I said, my voice measured, a careful balance between truth and deception. He smiled, a small hopeful curve of his lips, and I felt the sting of my own dishonesty. His love was a steady thing, a river that had worn its path over decades, and here I was, a stone lodged in the flow, disrupting everything. I wanted to reach out, to take his hand, to find the comfort of the familiar, but my arm remained at my side, heavy and unwilling. In the days that followed, he made plans with quiet enthusiasm. He showed me brochures, sent me links to charming bed and breakfasts, spoke of coastal views and long walks on the beach. Each suggestion was a thread, pulling me closer to a truth I was not ready to face. I nodded along, my responses automatic, my mind 1,000 miles away. I could see the hurt in his eyes, the way his shoulders slumped ever so slightly, but he did not push. His patience only deepened the well of my guilt, a dark pool I could not see the bottom of. At night, I would lie awake, my body a still silhouette against the pale sheets. I could hear his breathing, the slow rhythmic pull of air that seemed to echo in the quiet. I would close my eyes, and in the dark I would see him, the young delivery man, his smile, the warmth of his hand against mine. His voice would drift through my thoughts, a whisper of a life I had only glimpsed, a road not yet traveled. One evening as I prepared dinner, my phone buzzed on the counter. His name lit up the screen, a quiet pulse of light against the mundane backdrop of my life. I hesitated, my hands damp with the scent of garlic and rosemary, the knife resting against the cutting board. I glanced over my shoulder, but my husband was still in the garden, his figure a blur through the window. I wiped my hands and picked up the phone. His message was short, a simple question wrapped in longing. "Can we talk?" My fingers moved on their own, typing a response. A connection formed through the thin veil of technology. The conversation flowed, each word a step further from the edge of safety. He spoke of missing me, of the emptiness he felt when we were apart. His honesty was a blade, cutting through the layers of my denial, exposing the raw truth beneath. I told him about the trip, about the weekend my husband had planned. I expected anger, disappointment, but his response was gentle, a balm to the wound I had opened. "I understand," he wrote. "But if you go, I won't be here when you get back." The words struck me like cold water, a shock to my system. I read them over and over, each repetition deepening the impact. The choice before me solidified, a fork in the road where neither path led to where I had been. I stood in the kitchen, the scent of dinner filling the air, my phone a weight in my hand. I could hear my husband's footsteps approaching, the soft creak of the back door, the sound of his voice as he called my name. I slid the phone into my pocket, my mask slipping back into place. I turned to face him, my smile practiced, my expression calm. "Dinner's almost ready," I said, my voice steady, the lie wrapped in the ordinary. He stepped closer, his hand resting on my shoulder, a small gesture of love that felt heavier than it should. I met his gaze, and for a moment I thought he might see it all. The truth, the lies, the tangled web I had woven around us. But he only smiled, his trust a soft light that cast shadows across the room. As we sat down to eat, the table between us felt like a chasm. Each bite was a reminder of what I stood to lose, every word a thread that could unravel if I pulled too hard. I moved through the evening as if underwater, the world muffled, the colors muted. My choice lay before me, a path that led to the unknown, and as the night deepened I knew that soon, I would have to decide which way to go. The morning of the trip arrived with a stillness that wrapped itself around me like a shroud. The air felt dense, as if every breath I took sank heavily into my chest, pulling me deeper into the reality I could no longer escape. My suitcase sat by the door, a small, unassuming thing that seemed to carry the weight of two lives. One I had lived and one I had only imagined. My husband moved through the house with an easy rhythm, humming softly as he packed his things. His happiness was a quiet thing. Not the exuberant joy of youth, but the settled contentment of someone who believed he was walking toward a rekindling. He made coffee, the rich aroma filling the kitchen, a smell so deeply tied to our mornings that it made my stomach twist. His every gesture was a reminder of the life we had built, the history we shared. Each moment felt like a thread being pulled from the fabric of my resolve. As I dressed, my hands moved methodically, folding clothes into neat squares, tucking toiletries into their compartments. My phone lay on the bed, a silent witness to the choice before me. His last message still lingered on the screen, a quiet echo of the ultimatum he had given me. "If you go, I won't be here when you get back." The words had burrowed under my skin, a splinter I could not dislodge. I ran my fingers over the phone, the smooth glass cool against my skin, but I did not reply. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to choose. My husband appeared in the doorway, his expression soft, a shadow of concern behind his eyes. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice gentle. I nodded, my movements automatic. I picked up my suitcase, the handle firm in my grip, the wheels whispering against the floor as I moved toward the door. He reached for my hand, his touch a quiet plea, and I let him take it. His fingers were warm, familiar, but I could not bring myself to return the pressure. I felt like a doll, hollow, my movements controlled by strings I could not see. We stepped outside, the morning light pale against the sky. The car waited in the driveway, bags already packed, the engine a low hum. I slid into the passenger seat, the seatbelt clicking into place, a soft restraint that felt heavier than it should. As we pulled away, I turned my gaze to the window, watching the house fade into the distance, the life I had known slipping through the glass like sand through fingers. The drive was quiet, the landscape rolling by in shades of green and gray. My husband spoke in soft tones, his voice a steady backdrop to the storm in my mind. He pointed out familiar landmarks, shared memories of past trips, his laughter a gentle reminder of all we had been. I answered when needed, my responses thin and worn, the echo of a person I no longer recognized. With each mile, the weight of my choice pressed down harder. I imagined him waiting, his phone in hand, the minutes stretching into hours as he realized I wasn't coming. I saw his face, the way his smile would fade, the light in his eyes dimming as the truth settled in. The image struck me with a force I hadn't expected, a wave that pulled me under, leaving me gasping for air. We stopped for gas, my husband slipping out of the car, his absence a sudden release. I stared at my phone, the screen dark, a mirror to my own reflection. My hands moved on their own, typing out a message, a truth I had held back for too long. "I can't come back." The words hung in the air, fragile, a bridge burning behind me. I pressed send, the message shooting into the void, a thread of hope in a sea of uncertainty. When my husband returned, he handed me a coffee, his smile unguarded, his love an open door. I took it, the warmth of the cup seeping into my hands, a grounding sensation in a world that had lost its balance. He started the car, the engine rumbling to life, and I felt the pull of the road, the momentum of our shared history carrying me forward. As we continued on, I let go of the phone, the device slipping from my fingers into the depths of my bag. I turned to him, really looked at him, and saw not just the man I had known but the man he still was, the one who had stood by me, loved me, chosen me. His hand rested on the gearshift, steady, a quiet strength that held us both. I reached out, covered his hand with mine, and for the first time in what felt like years I let myself breathe. The road stretched out before us, a ribbon of possibilities winding into the distance. I did not know where it would lead, did not have a map to guide me, but for the first time I was willing to follow. I closed my eyes, the hum of the car a lullaby, and allowed myself to hope that somewhere along this path, I might find the pieces of myself I had lost, the fragments of a story that had yet to be written. And as the miles slipped by, I felt the weight of freedom settle over me, not the wild, reckless kind I had chased in secret, but the quiet, enduring kind that comes from choosing to stay.